I brought a handmade gift to Thanksgiving. My DIL said, "Leave it there." So I did, along with a quiet note to my lawyer. They woke up to learn the $22.00 M trust was gone. "Fiona, you're not even his real mother in spirit. You're just a woman who got pregnant and lied about it. You don't belong in this house." My ears rang. For a second I thought I had misheard her, but the silence around the table confirmed it. No one moved, no one spoke. Forks hovered mid-air, wine paused at lips, even the baby in the high chair had gone still. I blinked. Once, twice. She had said it. Out loud, in front of everyone. Rosie, my daughter-in-law. The woman I once gave a job to, the woman I once shielded from a criminal record when I caught her stealing from my bakery at 19, the woman who now stood there, in designer heels and flawless makeup, looking down at me like I was dirt beneath her shoe. She stepped closer to the table, bent down, and picked up the gift I had placed there just an hour earlier, a table scarf sewn from my late husband's shirt, blue cotton, soft with memory, stitched by my hands. It had taken me 3 weeks to make, every thread soaked in care and silence. Rosie dropped it to the floor. Then, deliberately, she stepped on it with the pointed heel of her red shoe. "You want us to keep this trash as a legacy?" she spat. "Take your lies and your cheap crafts and get out." In that act, her heel pressing on my husband's memory, I felt something shift. Not fury, not pain, but a pivot. From silence to sovereignty, from bearing to becoming. I did not cry. I hadn't the strength left for that. I felt my pulse pound behind my eyes, a muted drumming like fists on locked doors. My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Every breath tasted like copper. But I held it, all of it, like I always had. I reached down, slowly, and picked up the scarf. The fabric was still warm, faintly smelling of lavender and Sunday mornings. The heel's imprint left a crescent, like a bruise on memory. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from something older, deeper. I brushed off the dirt from the fabric like I was wiping dust from an old photo. My eyes stung, but not from shame or rage. No, from memory. Because at that moment, I was 19 again, on the cold tile of a hospital floor, my gown torn, my body bleeding, my voice hoarse from saying, over and over, I did not ask for this. No one had believed me then. No doctor, no nurse, no officer, not even my mother. And now, 40 years later, it was happening again. Except this time, I was not a girl anymore. I was a mother, and this was my son's house, and he, Tyler, the child I raised through storm and silence, sat at the head of the table, eyes down, saying nothing, not even a whisper in my defense. I straightened up, smoothed the tissue paper around the scarf, and reached into my coat pocket. The crease crinkled beneath my fingertips. That envelope had waited longer than most people wait for justice. There, folded in half, was an envelope, cream-colored, unassuming. Inside it, a handwritten note with 4 words, "Activate the clause." The envelope I'd carried for years, my quiet promise, now my power. My fingers curled around the envelope I'd kept as insurance for years. It was my quiet promise, and right now it had to speak. They kept eating behind me, passing plates, pouring drinks, laughing too loudly now, as if trying to erase what just happened. But the music had changed, and I was done being their invisible underscore of their comfort. This time, I was the composer. I remember the first time I saw Rosie's name on a resume. She was 19, applied for a cashier job at my small bakery on the east end of town. Back then, the bakery was all I had. I opened it after Tyler started high school, once I could finally afford to turn my pie-making into something more than survival. I named it after my mother, Irene's Oven, though I never once told her that. Some wounds never close, even with sugar. Rosie wore too much eyeliner and not enough patience. She showed up late to her interview, lied about her past job, and couldn't name a single type of sourdough. But she smiled that sort of bright, sharp smile that could slice butter. I hired her anyway. I believed in giving young women second chances. Lord knows I could have used one myself at that age. She worked behind the counter, got decent reviews from customers, knew how to upsell cinnamon rolls. But 3 weeks in, the till came up short. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe my math, maybe the evening managers. But then it happened again and again, until one evening I stayed late and watched from the back kitchen as Rosie slipped 2 20s from the cash drawer into her apron. She moved like someone who had done it before, quick, confident, no hesitation. I stepped out, flour still on my hands, and said her name. She froze. I told her to sit. I made tea. She stared at the floor the whole time. I could call the police, I said. I could ruin your record before you've even started your life. She did not cry. Instead, she said, "You wouldn't." I looked her dead in the eye. "Try me." Her hands clenched. Then, after a long silence, she whispered, "I just needed it for groceries. My mom's boyfriend left and she's not working. We're behind on rent." I do not know if it was true. I did not ask. I gave her the rest of the tea and told her to leave. No police, no public scene. But I also told her never to come back, and that if I heard of her stealing again, from anyone, I would make sure her name followed her like smoke. She walked out that night, and I never expected to see her again. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. 3 years later, Tyler brought her home. They met at some campus event. She had gone back to community college, studying marketing. She wore nicer clothes, smiled the same sharp smile. Tyler was besotted. Said she was strong, independent, real. I said nothing, because what could I say? That she was a thief? That I had caught her red-handed in my shop, lying to my face? Tyler would never believe me. He believed in people the way I once believed in promises. Completely. Blindly. I watched them fall in love like watching a match drop into dry grass. The proposal came quick. She moved in even faster. Suddenly, Rosie was the one cooking Thanksgiving meals, rearranging furniture, choosing the curtains. I was asked to call before visiting. My photos began disappearing from the walls. When I asked Tyler, he said they were redoing the aesthetic. But what hurt more than any of that was the shift in tone. Rosie never said a cruel word, outright, but her compliments always came laced with vinegar. "I love how you still use those old sewing machines. So authentic. Must be nice not having to worry about work stress anymore. Your pies are great, but we've started watching carbs." Tyler laughed. He always laughed. I began seeing less of him, not because he didn't love me, I still believe he did, but because love means little in a house where respect is no longer served. Then came the company. Tyler had this idea, a software startup aimed at helping small local businesses streamline inventory. It was clever, personal. He poured his savings into it, quit his job, took a risk. I supported him, cheered him on, until it all fell apart. Poor planning, misjudged demand, a prototype that took too long. Investors pulled out. Tyler was weeks away from losing the house, the car, everything. I found out through a neighbor, not from him. I drove over that day, asked him point blank what he needed. He would not look at me. "I can't ask you to bail me out, Mom." "You're not asking," I said. "I am offering," he cried. But I did not hug him. I did not say, "It'll be okay," because I had said those things before to people who threw them back in my face. Instead, I went home and made a call. My husband, God rest his soul, had left me nothing but debt when he died, but I paid it off, slowly, brick by brick, and when I rebuilt, I built quietly. I invested in small things, little stocks, long-term bonds, CDs. I never touched them, never told anyone. By the time Tyler's company collapsed, I had enough saved to give him a second chance. But I did it on paper, through a lawyer, a formal contract. I created a trust under my name, funneled the investment through it, and made Tyler the operational head, with one clause. If he ever married Rosie, all controlling shares would revert to me. It was not revenge. It was protection. Because I knew the kind of woman Rosie was, and I knew what she could do when given access to power. Tyler signed without question. Maybe he thought I would never enforce it. Maybe he thought love would be enough to change her. They got married 8 months later. Rosie never knew about the clause. Tyler never told her. But she must have suspected, because once the company started doing well, she began asking questions, poking around, calling their accountant, recommending new financial advisors. She kept saying things like, "We need to know where we really stand, and it's important to have clarity if we want to plan for our future." What she meant was, I want to know what belongs to me. I remained invisible, let them play house, let them think they had earned it all, because some traps do not need bait, only patience. They bought a new house, my money. They renovated the kitchen, my money. They sent their daughter to private school, my money. They threw parties where Rosie would clink her wine glass and say things like, "We built this from scratch." I would sit in the corner, a ghost among glossy people, and think, you have no idea. Once, at one of those parties, I caught Rosie in the hallway whispering to a guest. "She's sweet," the woman had said. Rosie smiled. "She means well. She's just old school. Thinks sewing gifts is the same as being present." I had been present for every scraped knee, every dentist appointment, every science fair. I had been present when Tyler had his first panic attack at 12, when he cried on my shoulder after his first girlfriend dumped him, when he broke his arm skateboarding and blamed himself. Rosie had been present for the glitter. But glitter does not hold foundations together. Dust does. I kept watching. Quietly. From the porch, from the back row of church, from the sidewalk as they drove past in cars I bought. Until this year, until that table, until those words. "You're not even his real mother in spirit." I suppose in her mind that made me disposable. But what she forgot is that women like me do not break. We settle, we observe. And when the time comes, we remove the ground they are standing on, without a sound. The house was full of voices when I arrived. Too many, too loud, none of them mine. Laughter spilled from the kitchen, footsteps thudded overhead, and somewhere in the distance a child shrieked in delight, or defiance, it was hard to tell which. The smell of roasted turkey, buttered yams, and cinnamon-sugared pecans floated through the air, but beneath it all, I could smell something colder. Performance. Rosie liked to host Thanksgiving like it was a red carpet event. Candles in identical brass holders, plates layered in 3 tiers, name cards in cursive, a dining table large enough to seat a board of directors, and her, the woman in command, not just of the kitchen, but of the atmosphere, of how gratitude should look, how family should behave, how I should disappear into the scenery without smudging the edges. I stood at the doorway, holding my gift, a small white box tied with a pale blue ribbon, cradled in both hands like it might fly away. The fabric inside was soft, folded tightly, the stitches still fresh from last night. My fingers ached from working on it, a table runner sewn from my husband's favorite shirt, the one he wore on Sunday mornings, stained faintly with coffee along the collar. I'd stitched into it a single phrase, "Grace remains." That was all I had left to say. Rosie appeared at the end of the hallway, barking orders with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Drinks go in the front cooler. No, not that one, the white one. And make sure the kids don't touch the pie yet. Fiona always brings her baked stuff, and we don't want them full before dessert." She said it lightly, almost sweetly, but it was barbed wire wrapped in velvet. When she finally noticed me, she paused, tilted her head, and plastered on that signature smile. "Oh," she said, "you made it." "I did," I replied. "Happy Thanksgiving, Rosie." She walked up, eyes darting to the box in my hands. "What's that?" she asked, though the disdain was already creeping into her voice. "Something I made," I said, "a table runner for today." Her lips curled in mock surprise. "You still making those little projects, huh?" she said, loud enough for a few heads to turn. "You're just unstoppable." Then, louder, "Come on, Fiona, you brought another one of your vintage masterpieces?" She reached out, untied the ribbon without asking, and lifted the fabric from the box. "Oh," she said, "of course. Linen, again." People nearby chuckled. One of her cousins smirked, whispering something to his wife. Rosie held it up like she was inspecting a worn-out dish towel. "This looks like it came out of a Depression-era garage sale," she said. "Is that a coffee stain?" "It was his shirt," I said quietly. "I stitched it from his favorite one." "Right," she said. "The dead husband narrative. So cozy." A few polite laughs from across the room. Some didn't know where to look. Some didn't care. Then she turned and walked toward the dining room. "Just leave it by the side table," she called over her shoulder. "No offense, but the main table is kind of curated. We don't really need sad energy there." I stood still. I heard someone chuckle, and then someone else. A slow ripple of amusement like smoke filling a room. Tyler walked past, carrying a tray of drinks. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, said nothing. I turned to place the box gently on the console by the wall. Not the table, not the place I had envisioned, but a corner behind the coats, between a bowl of keys and a forgotten baby toy. I folded the ribbon and tucked it underneath. I straightened my spine. Inside, something folded shut, like a door. This time would be the last. The guests continued to arrive. Plates clattered, wine poured freely. Children screamed and were hushed. The playlist cycled through songs chosen by Rosie, upbeat but soulless. Everything gleamed, everything shimmered, everyone was on their best performance behavior, except me. No one asked how I was doing. No one offered me a seat near the fire. I was given a corner chair by the far end of the table, between a toddler with sticky fingers and Rosie's aunt, who had never once remembered my name. I ate slowly, quietly. I chewed without tasting. My stomach was hollow, but not from hunger. Rosie made a toast. To abundance, to family, to choosing joy. Tyler chimed in, to building something from nothing. They raised glasses. I raised none. Then came the casual slights, the jokes about old people hoarding coupons, the references to Grandma's era, said with a grin like my life had been some quirky sitcom. Someone asked Rosie if I still sewed. She laughed. "Oh, she's committed to the craft," she said. "We all have our hobbies." Hobbies, I repeated under my breath. A lifetime of stitching, baking, surviving. A hobby. No one noticed. No one ever did. Dinner was served in courses. Rosie narrated every ingredient. Tyler passed things with the grace of a host pretending he had earned the silverware. The turkey was overcooked, the mashed potatoes bland, but everyone praised it like it was a Michelin meal. That was Rosie's power. She could convince a room that something empty was beautiful, and that something full, like me, was disposable. When dessert arrived, Rosie brought out her signature pumpkin tart, store-bought but transferred to a ceramic plate to maintain the illusion. She set it down like a trophy. "Oh," someone asked, "did Fiona bring a pie this year?" Rosie's eyes flicked to me. "She did," she said sweetly. "It's on the sideboard, but we'll stick to the tart tonight. No need to overwhelm the table." People nodded, shrugged, moved on. Tyler said nothing. Not once that evening did he say thank you. Not once did he stand beside me. And in that silence, I felt something ancient rise. Not anger, not pain, just clarity, like a room I had waited years to leave was finally open. I sat through dessert, through coffee, through the end of the playlist. Then I stood. No announcement, no goodbye. I walked to the coat rack, took my scarf, my gloves. The envelope was already in my purse. The table runner remained where I had left it, folded neatly in its box, untouched, forgotten, just as I had been. But not for much longer, because they thought I was just an old woman with frayed hands and soft footsteps. They thought kindness meant weakness. But the thing about quiet women is, we are the ones who write the last chapter, and mine was just beginning. The room was too warm. I remember that clearly, not from the oven or the fire, but from the closeness, the way everyone sat pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, laughter overlapping, wine flowing faster than water, that kind of warmth that suffocates instead of comforts. I was about to excuse myself when Rosie stood up. She clinked her spoon against her wineglass, that classic call for attention, the same way she had done when she announced her pregnancy, when she got her real estate license, when she finally lost those last 8 pounds. Her smile was wide, her eyes locked onto mine. "I have something to share," she said, almost singing the words. Something important, something long overdue. The chatter quieted, forks lowered, chairs adjusted slightly. I felt a tremor behind my ribs. She reached into the pocket of her slacks and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Printed, clean, cold. "Tyler," she said, turning to my son, "I know you love your mother. I do too, in my own way. But love doesn't mean silence. And it doesn't mean lies." He blinked. "Rosie, what are you doing?" She held up the paper, like a magician revealing the final card. "I got you a DNA test." A few people chuckled nervously. Rosie beamed. "No, really, I did. I wanted to make sure we were clear on your medical background. For the kids. For their future. You never know what might be hiding in a family tree, right? My hands gripped the edge of the table. She paused, dramatic, then read, "Paternally inconclusive. Maternal lineage confirmed. Biological ancestry inconsistent with reported history." Tyler frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means," she said, looking straight at me, "that Fiona lied. She never told you who your real father was, and she still has not." The silence was a scream. He turned to me. "Mom?" I couldn't answer. My throat refused to open. Rosie's voice sharpened. "She made up a story. A convenient little tale about a high school sweetheart, remember? The one who died in a car accident? That man never existed." I felt the room begin to spin, not from panic but from the speed at which my past crashed into the present. "You've been living a lie, Tyler," Rosie continued, "and it's time you knew the truth. Your mother—" "Enough," I said, barely above a whisper. But she wasn't done. "She's not the woman you think she is. She's not a saint. She's not a hero. She's just a woman who got pregnant, alone, young, and decided to spin a story for sympathy." She turned back to the table. "She's not a mother, she's a mistake. A walking guilt trip dressed in homemade sweaters." Few gasps. Someone dropped a spoon, but Tyler just sat there, frozen. I turned to him. He met my gaze and looked away. My breath caught, because I saw it in his eyes. The doubt, the retreat, the boy I raised, shrinking back into a man I no longer recognized. Rosie smiled again. "There, now that's out. We can move on. Honest table, honest family, right?" I sat down, slowly. No one spoke. No one touched the wine. The candles flickered too brightly. I could feel 20 sets of eyes bouncing between me and Tyler, waiting for someone to erupt, to deny, to cry. But I didn't, because none of this was new, not to me. It was 1983. I was working the night shift as a janitor at St. Mary's Hospital. I had dropped out of college the year before to help care for my father after his second stroke. Money was tight, options tighter. I remember the night because the power had flickered, a summer storm rolled in, and the backup generator had kicked on. Everything buzzed under dim yellow light. I was mopping the second-floor corridor when someone grabbed me from behind. I remember the linoleum was cold. I remember the lights humming. I remember his breath smelled like spearmint gum, and I remember the sound of my own voice, breaking as I begged him to stop. But no one came. I was 19. When I reported it the next morning, they asked if I had been drinking. They asked what I had been wearing. They asked if I had possibly misread the situation. They said the doctor I accused had a spotless record. They said a janitor's word against a physician's would not hold up. I was fired a week later. 3 weeks after that, I found out I was pregnant. I never said his name again, not even to Tyler. I created a story, a high school boyfriend, a car accident, a closed chapter with no survivors. I didn't do it to lie, I did it to protect him. Because how do you explain to a child that they were born out of violence, that their very existence began with a scream? I raised him with everything I had. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, patched his jeans by candlelight. I kissed his bruises, clapped at his recitals, held his hand through fevered nights. But in the end, none of that mattered, because blood tells one story, and people like Rosie only care about that one. Back at the table, Rosie folded the paper neatly and tucked it into her purse. "As I said," she repeated, "we move forward with honesty now." Tyler finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, just empty. I looked at him. "I wanted you to have a clean start," I said. "A name that wasn't a headline, a life that didn't begin in pain." He nodded slowly, but still said nothing else. Not, "I understand," not, "You're still my mother," just silence. And that silence roared louder than any accusation. I turned my eyes toward Rosie. She was already smiling, already sipping wine, already pretending it was all done now, that she had simply set a truth free, but what she had done was something else. She had taken a knife to a scar and dug it open in front of strangers, and Tyler let her. I felt something shift inside me, a stillness, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, not the wind, not the thunder, but the exact second the air goes still and the trees stop swaying. The kind of stillness that says, "You have seen enough." My hands stopped shaking, my breath evened out, and when I stood again, I was no longer the woman who brought the scarf. I was the woman who wrote the will, and I was ready. I thought it would end with the DNA, that they had taken what they came for, the piece of me they thought they could expose, dissect, reduce into scandal, and that, satisfied, they would leave the rest alone. But I forgot what people like Rosie do with power. They do not stop at truth. They twist it into performance. It was not enough for her to call me a liar, not enough to rip open the most painful chapter of my life and parade it like gossip over wine. No, she needed a final act. "Before we cut the pie," Rosie announced, her wine glass raised again, "I thought we could share a little Thanksgiving laugh." A few cousins chuckled politely. Someone whistled. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. Rosie reached for the remote, and there it was. The screen on the wall flickered to life. Tyler had installed it last year, one of those wide, curved things meant to make you feel like you were inside the movie. Instead, it put me inside a memory I never meant to share. The video began. A shaky camera, obviously hidden behind a half-open kitchen door. In the frame, me, sitting at the breakfast table, alone, a paper plate in front of me, a slice of pumpkin pie, a paper napkin folded neatly beside it. I recognized the moment instantly. Last Thanksgiving. I had arrived early, hoping to help. Rosie had smiled and told me the kitchen was already handled, that I could sit and relax. Everyone else was in the dining room, taking selfies in front of the floral centerpiece. I had taken a slice of pie, not hers, but mine, the one I baked and brought, and sat at the corner table in the kitchen, away from the laughter. In the video, I lift my fork. I chew slowly. I stare into the distance, my shoulders slumped. I looked lonely. The room erupted in laughter. "Oh my God," one of Rosie's friends said. "You guys recorded that?" Rosie smiled, like a pageant queen. She does this every year. Shows up early, brings her little pies and napkins and embroidered sadness, eats in the kitchen like she's in a black and white movie. It's kind of her tradition. More laughter. "She thinks she's part of the narrative," someone else said. "It's adorable." Tyler didn't laugh. But he didn't stop it either. He sat there, still, his hand around his drink, his eyes watching the screen with something unreadable behind them. I looked down at my lap. My hands were folded, perfectly still. No one noticed that I had stopped breathing. Until Tyler stood. The room quieted again, like they expected him to say what I never would. He cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, looking at me now, fully, "I think it might be time we talked about other arrangements." I said nothing. He continued, "I mean, you've been on your own for a long time, and now with the kids and the space, I think maybe a community could be good for you." Someone coughed. Someone nodded. "You know," he added quickly, "somewhere with people your age, with support, with structure. We'd still visit, of course." Structure? As if I was falling apart. As if my presence needed managing, containing, filing away into a tidy little corner where it would not interfere with the curated life he had built with Rosie. I looked at him for a long time, and I saw it. The final death of something. Not anger, not rebellion, just abandonment. The boy who once held my hand crossing the street, who used to tuck notes into my apron pockets that said, "I love you more than cake," now standing there, suggesting I be placed somewhere appropriate. I reached for the box, the one that held the table runner I had made. It had been left on a sideboard, untouched, still wrapped. I opened it slowly, took the scarf into my lap, and then slid my hand underneath, where I had tucked something else earlier. A small envelope, unmarked on the outside save for one neat line in black ink. To Robert, private counsel. I placed it gently beside my wine glass. Someone asked, "What's that?" I smiled. "Just a thank you note," I said. No one asked again. They returned to their drinks. The screen went black. Rosie started clearing plates. Tyler took a phone call, and I sat there, quiet, holding the last gift I would ever make for this house. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed to remember who I was before they forgot entirely. That night, the house was silent when I walked in. My own house. My real one, not the pristine colonial where Rosie played hostess. but the quiet, slightly creaky two-bedroom home I had kept in my name all these years, tucked behind a row of pine trees, with a mailbox that leaned slightly to the left and a porch light that flickered when the wind was too strong. It was mine, and no one else's. I hung up my coat, set the box gently on the dining table, and went to boil a kettle. The scarf was still warm in my hands, not from heat, but from memory. It smelled faintly of cedar and lavender and old thread. I made a cup of tea. Then I took the USB drive from my purse and slid it into the side of the laptop. My grandson had handed it to me quietly during dessert when no one was looking, just a soft whisper. I recorded everything, Grandma, even before the dinner. I hadn't asked him to, but he did because children see. They see the cracks grown-ups pretend not to. And he, bless his small heart, had seen what his parents could not. The file was long, nearly an hour. It started in the kitchen, before I arrived, Rosie laughing with a few of the younger cousins. "She'll probably bring another homemade disaster," she said, giggling. "God, I hope it's not another one of those embroidered potholders. I swear it's like she's allergic to relevance." Laughter. "She still thinks she's the matriarch," someone said. "No," Rosie replied. "She thinks we owe her a standing ovation for surviving the 50s. The video continued, capturing the moment she unwrapped my table runner, sneered at it, tossed it to the side. Capturing Tyler nodding along, silent. Capturing the toast, the clip of me eating alone. My humiliation turned into a party trick. It caught every word. "You don't belong in this house. She's a mistake. Time for structure." Click. I closed the file. I didn't cry. I sipped my tea and opened my email. The subject line was already in my drafts, saved for years, waiting. Subject, Activate Clause 22. Emotional Equity Agreement attached. The USB recording, a scan of my signature, and a photo of the scarf lying crushed beneath Rosie's heel. My fingers hovered over the send button for only a moment. Then I clicked. And with that, the world I had built for them, brick by silent brick, began to rearrange. 3 years earlier, I had sat across from my attorney, Robert, in a quiet office in a building no one remembered. We were drawing up a standard amendment to the trust fund I had created for Tyler's startup, meant to protect my assets while giving him operational control. But as he explained the options, I asked him a question no client had asked before. "Can I write a clause that protects me emotionally?" He had blinked, curious. "Emotionally? Yes," I said. "Not from physical harm, but from humiliation, from neglect, from erasure." He'd leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Well," he finally said, "you could create a conditional clause, something triggered by documented behavior, something subjective but provable. I want it to be called the Emotional Equity Agreement," I said. He smiled, intrigued. "Sounds poetic." "I want it to be binding." We drafted it over several sessions. It was simple. If, at any point, I was publicly ridiculed, diminished, or shamed in a way that could be substantiated through video, audio, or written witness accounts, then the clause would trigger. And if triggered, all assets would revert back to me, immediately and irrevocably. The assets included 60% ownership of Tyler's company, a detail he had forgotten, even though I never did. Full legal ownership of the house he and Rosie lived in, which was still in my name, temporarily assigned to them under a residential grant I could revoke. A $22 million 0-cents portfolio built through decades of saving, quiet investing, and reinvesting, which sat in a discretionary trust under my sole direction. They had thought it was theirs, because I let them believe it, because I never needed them to thank me, I just needed them not to humiliate me. And they failed. So the clause was now live. The next morning, Robert called. "It's done," he said. "All assets frozen as of 7:12 a.m. Tyler's company is being notified. The house revocation will go out by courier today, and the trust funds are being moved into a new holding account in your name." I nodded, though he could not see me. "Thank you. I have to say," he added after a pause, "this is the most elegant legal strike I've ever seen." "It's not revenge," I said. "I didn't say it was. It's closure." He hesitated again, then said, "Fiona, are you sure you don't want to give them a chance to explain?" "No," I said. "I gave them 40 years for that." And I ended the call. I sat back, listening to the clock tick. Outside, the wind had picked up. The trees swayed gently. A leaf brushed against the window. Somewhere across town, Rosie was probably waking up, sipping her fancy coffee, checking her calendar. Tyler would be reviewing emails, preparing for Monday meetings, scheduling investor calls. Neither of them knew yet, but soon they would. Soon, the house they decorated for the holidays would no longer be theirs. The company they bragged about at brunch would no longer exist as they knew it. The bank accounts they spent from would no longer accept their PINs. They would try to reach me, they would leave voicemails, they would cry, they would rage, and I would not respond. Because some stories do not need second chapters. They need endings. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke early. Not from habit, not from restlessness, but from something deeper. The kind of stillness that follows a storm you did not cause, but no longer fear. I brewed my coffee the old way, in a French press that Tyler once called quaint. The scent filled the kitchen, and I stood by the window, watching the trees outside bow under the early frost. Somewhere across town, a courier was ringing a doorbell. At exactly 8:06 a.m., Rosie opened her front door in silk pajamas and full irritation. She was not expecting a man in a dark suit holding an envelope. "Rosalind Turner?" he asked formally. She blinked. "Who wants to know?" He handed her the documents. "You and your husband have 15 days to vacate this property. The home is no longer under your name. The revocation follows Clause 22 of the Emotional Equity Agreement, which both you and Mr. Turner signed 3 years ago. All terms were legally binding and reviewed by your independent counsel at the time." "What?" she snapped. "That's a mistake. It is not. Ownership was never legally transferred. You were temporary residents under the Fiona Harper residential grant, which has been formally revoked." Tyler appeared behind her, still rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" The courier nodded at him. "Mr. Turner, your company has also received formal notice. All shares and financial controls previously under your name have been reassigned." Rosie's voice rose. "Wait, what do you mean reassigned? You can't just take our house." "It was never yours," the man said plainly. "Ms. Harper retained all rights. You signed the agreement 3 years ago, Mr. Turner. Clause 22 has been activated." Rosie's face went pale. Tyler looked like a man waking into a nightmare he didn't know he'd authored. "We'll fight this," she hissed. "We'll call our lawyer." The man simply handed her a card. "You'll want to start here. That's your mother-in-law's attorney. He's already several steps ahead." And with that, he walked away. By noon, the news had begun to spread. A small but well-respected news outlet published an article. "Just a maid? Elderly woman humiliated on camera revealed as founder of $22.00 Fiona Fund, supporting emotionally abused women." The article included snippets of the now viral clip, Rosie mocking my hand-sewn gift, laughing at me, eating alone, calling me a walking guilt trip. It included my response. Or rather, the lack of one. The camera had caught my silence, the dignity in it. That was the part that broke the internet. Comments poured in by the thousands. She sat there with such grace. Imagine treating someone like that who raised your husband. That scarf was probably worth more than their house in emotional value alone. TikTokers made duets of Rosie's voiceover footage of war memorials and abandoned mothers. Influencers called it the Thanksgiving takedown. A viral hashtag emerged, Fiona Claus. Someone made merch, t-shirts that read, "Activate the clause." By the end of the day, Rosie's Instagram was in shambles. She tried turning off the comments. That only made it worse. She posted an apology video, makeup flawless, lighting perfect. "I just want to say," she began, "that I didn't mean any harm. Families are complicated. Sometimes things are said in jest, and..." The video was screen-recorded, re-uploaded, dissected, and dragged. People were not buying it. Because people had seen the truth. And it was not a staged apology. It was a quiet woman picking up a crushed table runner from the floor, brushing off someone else's footprint with a grace that no longer needed defending. Tyler's company crashed within 72 hours. Once my 60% control transferred back to my hands, I declined to renew several contracts they had built their projections on. I had not come to destroy, but I would not enable any more either. Investors pulled out. The press spun the story with glee. Startup darling implodes after hidden matriarch withdraws support. Tyler called me 5 times. I did not answer. He even sent a message through my lawyer asking for a moment to explain. But explanations come before betrayal, not after. His final voicemail was softer than the rest. "Mom, I didn't know how bad it had gotten. I swear I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was just trying to keep the peace." And maybe he was. But peace built on the silence of one woman is not peace. It is erasure. And I was done being erased. Rosie was dropped from her PR firm. Several of her former clients publicly denounced her. Local news wanted interviews. I declined all of them. I didn't need a camera to validate my story. It was enough that the world now saw what had been seen so clearly by one little boy, my grandson, who had slipped me that USB like a lifeline. I had dinner with him a week later, just the 2 of us. He asked me, "Grandma, are you happy they got what they deserved?" I sipped my tea and said, "I'm not happy they fell." He looked confused. I smiled. "I'm just glad I'm no longer holding them up." I moved out of my old home the following month. Not because I had to. Legally, I still owned 3 properties across 2 counties, including the one Tyler and Rosie had briefly called theirs. But I didn't want walls that remembered their footsteps. I didn't want closets haunted by silences I had swallowed. I wanted a space where my quiet wasn't an apology, it was permission. The new place was tucked into a grove just outside town. It had a name I hadn't chosen, but one someone else had, a woman from the board. Fiona House, the sign read, for silenced women. I had donated the land. I had donated the structure, but they had donated the name. It was a small, sunlit retreat, part community center, part residency, part healing space. No therapists on staff, just women and gardens and books and chairs that didn't creak when you leaned into them. We didn't speak much. That was the point. Some days I sat on the porch and stitched quietly, while other women planted herbs. Some days I taught a girl how to knead dough until it sighed into the shape of something familiar. Some days I just sat. Peace has no ceremony, it just arrives. My grandson visited on Sundays. He came with pockets full of candy and eyes full of questions. "Why do you live here, Grandma?" "Because I like the silence," I'd say. "But your house was big." It was loud, too. He nodded like he understood, and maybe, in some way he did. One day he sat beside me on the porch and said, "Mom says you ruined everything." I paused my stitching. "Do you think I did?" I asked him. He shook his head. "No, I think you stopped pretending." I reached for his hand and squeezed it. He grinned. "You're like a silent superhero," he added. I laughed. "Is that what I am?" He nodded. "The quiet kind, the kind that waits until the last chapter." A few weeks later, I received a request from a local news station. They wanted to interview me. Not about the trust, not about the scandal, not even about the internet frenzy that had started to die down. They wanted to talk about Fiona House, about resilience, about rebuilding. I said yes. We filmed on the porch. I wore the same cardigan I had the night I mailed the envelope. It still smelled faintly of tea and lavender. My hands stayed folded, my back straight. The interviewer smiled, young and eager. She asked the expected questions about my past, my investments, the way silence can sometimes scream louder than anger. Then she leaned forward and said, "Do you think you got revenge?" I looked at her, at the camera, at the quiet hill behind her. "No," I said, "I didn't get revenge." She blinked. "I just stopped forgiving people who weren't sorry." There was a pause. And then I added, "I didn't want to punish them. I just wanted to stop pretending I wasn't hurt." They aired the segment during prime time. People wrote letters. Some shared their own stories of being overlooked, dismissed, laughed at for being too much or too old or too emotional. One woman wrote, "I watched you pick up that scarf and I felt like someone had picked up me." Another said, "My mother was a Fiona. I wish I had seen her sooner." But I didn't reply to most. Not because I didn't care, but because some things are meant to be felt, not explained. The last scene of the segment showed a close-up of the table runner, the one Rosie had crushed. It was framed now, under glass, hanging in the main hall of Fiona House. The camera zoomed in slowly, until only the embroidery showed. "You don't lose family, you lose illusions." Then the screen faded to black, and the world finally was quiet. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or quietly cast aside, then you understand why I told it. Because revenge doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it walks on soft feet, holding a pen, not a knife. And sometimes the loudest justice is silence, followed by peace. If you want more stories like this, true stories from the quietest woman in the room, then go ahead and subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Every week, I'll share what they thought I'd forget. But I didn't, because wisdom doesn't fade, it waits, and now it speaks.